Thank you. And thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure and my honor to be with you today. I am, in fact, inspired being with you today. Inspired to be at an Agile conference so focused on principles and practices, so much at the root of Agile and not full of vendors and tools and lots of, to me, irrelevant processes in Agile. So, sorry, did I just slam the international conference? I might have. I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm so happy to hear what's going on in South Africa and to be part of it for this little bit. So I am from Chicago. It was the location, I believe, of the first XP conference, where many of the movers of Agile first came together, where some of the first XP immersions were held, as well as some of the software craftsmanship movement, which I've become very involved with, have all been sort of centered around there. And so I'm amazed that when I think we've got something special going in a region, I'll visit someplace and find out that the world is so much bigger than I thought. And I appreciate you bringing that to me today and see what you have. So I want to talk, do I have some slides up? I need to do something. So I'm fast through this. There we are. My momentum's still there, isn't it? All right, thank you. So I want to talk first today about how we hire developers. And I think a process for hiring a developer looks something maybe like this. You post a job somewhere, you wait for the qualified candidates to line up at your door, you pick the best one, and you make them an offer. Is that the way it pretty much works? Maybe it's okay. Maybe it's a little bit more like this. You post a job and wait and wait and wait and wait. Perhaps you don't have time to wait, and so you trade time for money and you hire a recruiter, and they bring you a host of well-qualified applicants from which you pick the best, and then you shell out tons of money to this recruiter for bringing you the person. I don't know what the rates might be in South Africa, but like we pay in the States at least a quarter of the first year's salary to this recruiter for bringing you. And that same recruiter who will come back 2 years later and take the same person and get another placement for them in another company, right? I did a quick search on Career Junction. I don't know how popular this site is, but it had some South Africa software development job postings. What I saw was that only 183 out of nearly 3,500 job postings were for junior level, for entry-level software development. And in just the conversations I've had with you today and with Kevin last night, it really seems like people want to hire highly qualified, very experienced developers. And this is similar to what we face in the States. There's a demand for finding experienced developers. I want to talk for a second, though, about what is this experience thing that people seek after. Why is it that when looking for a developer, we have this metric of experience that we want to pull from? I think it's because to most of the world, software is magic. Right? You take some requirements, you throw them into a room with a handful of engineers, they make some noise, they consume beverages, and out comes a piece of software in 6 to 12 months, right? And if you have magic, if software is magic, then what you need to make magic is an experienced magician. Because magicians know how to make magic, right? The problem with experience, though, is that somebody can have 15 years of experience. And that experience could be experiencing the same year over and over and over and over. I'm sure you're shaking your heads because you know these people, right? They use the same tools, they make the same mistakes, they make the same excuses year after year after year. And that years of experience is actually no qualification at all for them. I remember in 2009, I was surfing job postings, looking around at the market, and I saw a posting in 2009 for somebody looking for a Ruby on Rails developer with 10 years of experience. If you're not familiar with Ruby on Rails, it was invented in 2004. So in 2009, not even DHH, the creator of Rails, had 10 years of Rails experience. I want to come to something that Aslan talked about this morning, about needing a density of talent. He talked about how everyone's chasing this top 20% of experience, but what about that middle 40%? How do we bring that middle 40% up to a level where they can be productive software engineers? When I heard that this morning, I'm like, yes! Like this talk is going to hit something, because that's exactly what I want to bring to you today, is a strategy, a plan for taking capable developers, discovering talent at a very early stage, and training them to become great software developers. So, Aslam, game on. Let's do this. Software apprenticeship. I'm going to give you a definition of it, just so we have a sort of common place to start. Software apprenticeship is an experienced programmer, craftsman, takes on an inexperienced one, an apprentice, under his or her wing in order to teach the apprentice the skills necessary to become a craftsman. And I speak to you today out of the 9 years of experience we have doing this at 8th Light. 8th Light actually began as a mentor and his apprentice. We started the apprenticeship program in full just as a company of 5 developers. 9 years later, we're a company of 51 worldwide and currently have 13 apprentices. All told, it's like about 83 people who have come through our apprenticeship program. Some have gone on to successful careers at other companies, but many have stayed with us and continue to be a part of the company. And so that's where I'm coming from. What I've tried to do today is extract some principles out of what we have done that I hope are universal. I don't hope today that you can take the 8th Light Apprenticeship Program and duplicate it. But I'm trying to step up one level and talk about some of the principles we operate under, and hope that you can find a place to connect with that. The values behind what we're doing are the same values that we talk about in Agile, the same values you've been hearing about all day. So we're going to work on the principle level. So the first one I want to get into is that learning is the primary objective. I sort of set this up in contrast to what we call the US internships. These are usually taking a university student, maybe still in progress, hiring them for the summer, and squeezing them for as much productive work as possible. Sort of a way to get, so maybe occasionally you find somebody who you go on to hire later, but it's usually about how much work can I get out of this young, cheap person so that I can get more work done. I remember my first internship. I started my career in signal processing, actually working for the company that I'm speaking through now, this wireless microphone company. We're doing signal processing. I got there, they plopped down this thick assembly language manual on my desk, and we're like, poured all these algorithms from C over into this assembly language. Because we were running on this super specialized DSP chip, very specialized instructions. So I spent the whole summer doing this. And now, did I learn something? I did. I learned this pretty obscure and completely useless in the rest of my career assembly language. But I learned a little bit about team structure, but that was not the goal of the company in having me for the summer. They needed these algorithms ported, right? And they got it. But any learning that happened to me was incidental, not intentional. And in an apprenticeship, we sort of flip the equation. The goal is not to get the most value out of an inexperienced person, but to invest in growing a great employee. So there's more structure, there's more supervision, and a longer-term outlook. The projects that an apprentice does don't focus on what the company needs, but rather on the learning of the apprentice. And this is a fairly hard step to take. We're going to hire somebody and to pay them just to learn? Yeah. Yeah, and I refer you back to our setup when we talked about that big chunk of cash that we send a recruiter to bring us a qualified candidate. I can turn that same cash into an apprenticeship for somebody and bring somebody into the program that way. Our equation, A-Flight is a consultancy. We actually bill the whole team out at one rate, regardless of their experience, because we set this really high standard. What that means is when somebody graduates, we put them onto a project, billing at our full rate. We can actually recoup their apprenticeship in just a couple of months. It does not take long for us to recoup that cost. And the equation, I'm sure, will be different in your context, but it's not as expensive as it thinks, as you might think. It just takes getting over that hump to get started. Okay, that was a long one. The next principle, choose potential over credential. The question becomes, how do you gauge potential? How do you see that in somebody? I'll tell you what we do at A-Flight. So to apply for an apprenticeship at A-Flight, you actually have to submit a code challenge. We give you a challenge, you have to submit code to us. And we don't actually, okay, this is a little bit of a secret, please, don't tweet it. We don't actually care how good the code is. It's not about some objective standard of measure. What we do is we take that code and we tear it to shreds. And we give the applicant tons and tons of feedback about their code, how they can improve it, where it falls short, what they can do to make that code better. And then we watch what happens next. What we look for when we're gauging potential, we're looking for a posture towards learning. We're looking for somebody who will take that feedback, incorporate it into their solution, and resubmit it to us. And that gives us an incredible measure of somebody's potential, their posture towards learning. It helps give us sort of a trajectory as well. Like you see how much they grow in just one round of feedback. That helps us sort of extrapolate how long an apprenticeship that they like to be. The next principle is that mentoring is personal. And in my first job, I had a mentor. But what that person basically did was, show me where the cafeteria was and help me find the bathroom, that sort of thing, right? And it was somebody assigned to me by HR, a part of a company policy. But we're talking about something very different when it comes to apprenticeship. We're talking about one person, one mentor, choosing, believing in, taking on a student, an apprentice. To me, this commitment actually borders on sacred. It's the sort of intertwining of two lives, the combination of efforts and talents, this mutual accountability and commitment to one another. So at A-Flight, every craftsman makes their own hiring decisions, and anybody can bring on an apprentice at any time. We have one check to make sure that we can pay for it and that we're going to have projects with it, but it's an individual decision at every step of the way. And this starts out a mutual one-on-one relationship that's very personal. The next principle here is that mentors need not be masters. You only really need to know one more thing than the guy coming behind you to be able to teach it, right? And what happens if you start in this sort of culture of learning and apprenticeship is you end up with these proximal zones of learning. I love my little drawing like this, but it's that everyone is teaching the person right behind them. In fact, it's actually really hard for a master programmer to sit down and teach a beginner. I had this experience. I got involved with a group in the US called Girls Who Code, and they take mentors. You go into a classroom of high school girls and you teach them to program. So I suddenly found myself, after many, many years of programming, having to explain things like variables and loops. I don't remember what it was like not to know what a variable is, right? A variable is a variable. It's just a variable. So I was kind of at a loss. Luckily, this group has a pretty good curriculum that sort of will break things down. But what I actually did was I took my apprentice to this with me, because I realized very quickly that I can't connect, but she could. She could, because she remembers what it was like not to know what a variable was. And she's got a model in her head for how she learned and what a loop is. right? So she's actually way more equipped to teach that beginner than I was. One of the ways we do this in practice is often we'll have an apprentice learn something and immediately teach it. Because it's one of the best ways to learn something, to learn it well, is to have to teach it to somebody. And so, they'll go read a chapter of clean code or read about a design pattern or a principle, and then present it to the rest of the apprentices. And we have those sort of presentations just sort of ongoing as a part of the zones of learning that we have. All right, learning is pull, not push. So this contextual learning that we do in apprenticeship is very different than a classroom setting. And it's the idea of getting the information, the skills that you need right when you need them. As opposed to sitting in a classroom for 4 or 5 years, taking in a bunch of information, taking in a bunch of knowledge, and then transitioning over to a job where suddenly you're supposed to apply all those lectures that you slept through and the late nights of eating tacos or whatever you were eating. The apprenticeship model puts the apprentice in a context where they need to learn something to succeed. And at each stage, it's about setting up just the next right amount of challenge, creating what I call a knowledge gap between what you know and what you need to know to accomplish the next task that you have. And this way, the apprentice pulls the knowledge that they need. Speaking of knowledge, it's nothing. So in choosing to teach apprenticeship, we're drawing from a very old tradition of learning. So apprenticeship was born in a time without centralized learning centers, with a time before the printing press. There wasn't cheap books to be able to learn from. So all the knowledge about a trade was tied up in individuals. And if you wanted to learn something, you had to find somebody who knew that and be apprenticed to them and learn from them. But today, we not only have these centers of learning, but we have practically instant access to everything that's ever been known by anyone. It's maybe a slight exaggeration of what you find on the internet, but it's not far off. If you want to know how to do anything, there's a YouTube video that will show you, right? Knowledge is very easy to find and easy to come to. But it's precisely because of the volume of information that's returned even by the most specific of Google search that again has made apprenticeship relevant. Because how do you know what information is good? How do you know that the person, the person sharing that information knows what's going on? Ever since I took a fishing vacation, and I was fishing and I caught the fish and was ready to eat the fish, and I suddenly realized that, Dad always skinned and cleaned the fish. And I had no idea how to clean a fish or to cook it. So what do? I go on YouTube, and I found like a dozen people telling me how to fillet a bass. Right? And they all had a different method, and I had no idea what to do, and I made a mess out of this bass. We didn't eat it. But there's so much information out there, it takes a guide to find your way through it. The mentor serves as this guide through the vast force of information that we have, sort of carving out a specific path for an apprentice to follow. This becomes a sort of individually curated curriculum of exercises and readings for a person to learn from. If knowledge is nothing, practice is everything. The apprentice learns by doing. Knowing what is very different from knowing how. And coding is actually more similar to the traditional crafts than you might at first think. I think the thing that really defines a craft is the feedback between the hand and the eye. So a carpenter working with a piece of wood is shaping it, is sanding it, feeling the wood, seeing it, modifying. There's this loop, this constant loop of somebody working in a craft. And the same is actually true with us when we code. We have this keyboard interface in between us and the computer, but it's the same sort of hand-eye feedback. It's part of what makes test-driven development so important, because it gives us that quick feedback. We know when we do something, it breaks, or we do something, it passes, red, green. It's that feedback loop. It's why TDD has strengthened the craft of software. So What that means, that like the traditional crafts, that there are a real set of physical skills that need to be learned. And it's in the context of practicing that an apprentice develops those skills. Right, the next principle is that learning never stops. While we do eventually graduate apprentices and start calling them craftsmen, that attitude of learning can't ever stop. In a sense, once you're an apprentice, you're always an apprentice. The industry keeps moving, technologies keep moving, and you have to constantly be learning to stay ahead. The way that this is sort of expressed in 8byte is that we have a final review process for the apprentice. We give them 2 weeks, they do a set of challenges, they do some coding, they do some writing, some presentations, and they go before a review board that just gives them tons and tons of feedback on their work, communicating to them that, yes, you're reaching an important milestone, but this milestone is really just another beginning of your journey of learning. Okay, good. I want to get maybe a little bit more practical into how to actually start an apprenticeship program. Some of the nuts and bolts of things we've done to sort of get off the ground. The first step, I would say, is to identify mentors. And then looking at your organization, ask yourself a few questions. Who would I like to clone? Who would I like a duplicate of in the organization? It's kind of what apprenticeship is. Who is the one always helping others out? Like, who is the one who will stop their work to answer the question? Who are the ones that people come to when they have questions? Who already has a really good set of skills and disciplines that they can share? But my best answer to this question is you. You're here, because you're here, you're learning, you obviously care, you have a set of skills to develop. So before forming a mass search across your company for who to mentor, I would start with yourself. And that's a little bit the way I look at the world. I want anything I do, any leadership I do to begin with myself and begin with what I do. So find a set of mentors, find people who are ready to take this journey. And it's not just like, oh yeah, I'll do that, right? We're talking about a significant amount of time. Our craftsmen who mentor still will bill a full week's worth of hours apart from their mentoring. So their mentoring actually comes out of extra lunch times, meeting after hours, meeting sort of in the in-between of their project work. So it's not something to take lightly. So it's something to really begin with a solid commitment. Once you have some mentors identify the learning objectives. Like, what does this apprentice need in order to succeed at your company? I've put up just kind of a middle snapshot of our learning outcomes. We call them our apprenticeship checklists. I'm going to share with you a link at the end so that you can grab these if you want to. But I would caution you a little bit in that these are ours in our context. You'll see things like, you'll see good programming practices like TDD and refactoring. You'll see design principles, pair programming. You'll also see a lot of the project management kind of things. We actually don't hire project managers at 8byte. The craftsman is actually responsible for their work and planning their work. We don't have scrum masters. We just have a craftsman who both does the work and communicates about the work and makes commitments. So we have a whole set of skills around that process that's in our checklist. But I encourage you to identify what are the tools, the specific specific practices that you have at your company that you need the apprentice to know in order to be successful. And then from those learning objectives, build out a set of exercises. So these are those sort of toy projects, those non-valuable to the project, to the company kind of projects that are built for the apprentice's learning. They, in each case, necessitate the learning of new information. They aren't necessarily designed to teach, but they're just to set up that gap of what somebody needs to know in order to be successful. You see tic-tac-toe up here because we do a lot of this at 8byte. It's sort of our favorite sort of context to play in. It's a fairly solvable game, right? It has a perfect solution. It has an algorithm you can write that will always win. But we just change the problem all the time. So for example, in teaching good design skills and separation of concerns between sort of your app core logic and whatever framework you're using to deliver that. We'll actually have an apprentice build a tic-tac-toe game that can be played via command line sort of text interface, and that can be served by a web server. It forces them to really think about the boundaries between systems and to think about keeping yourself separated from that UI, separated from that framework, and focused on the core logic. And we have a ton of different things. Sometimes we'll say, okay, now do a 4x4 tic-tac-toe, and that sweet algorithm we had now takes 2 hours to run. So in order to teach optimization and push the boundaries of performance. The other thing to sort of put together is a reading list. An important part of the learning process is to be reading. We also have apprentices write during their apprenticeship, sort of blogging daily their experiences and what they're learning. This is just a snapshot of some of the things that we have apprentices read. But again, it's something. This will be in the handout you can download at the end as well. But have something that reinforces the projects as you're building them. So when I'm really focusing on design patterns in a project, I'll be reading a design patterns book. So you sort of marry those two things together. It lets different learning styles meet each other. Some people learn better from reading than others. Some people learn from videos better than others. So sort of having this library of information that is sort of your canon for good software development. Okay. So it's time to find candidates. Where do you find people to begin? We're fortunate at this point at A-Flight in that we have built a brand around training beginners, and so lots of them come. So we get lots of applications. And we actually have put in a number of self-selection mechanisms to help people sort of find their way in. So the exercise I talked about, you actually have to be able to write code. If you don't respond to the feedback, you're just sort of done. So we build in some of these self-selection things that get the pool narrowed down. Initially we did some university recruiting. Local user groups is a great place, I think, as well, because it's often full of people who are really predisposed to being learning types of individuals. But in looking for people, it's really easy to go out and choose somebody who's just like yourself, especially when I mentioned apprenticeship is kind of like cloning yourself. One of the things that I've done in the last few years is intentionally find people that are different than I am in order to sort of bring a variety and diversity of opinions and backgrounds and dispositions into the company. So it's important. And this, again, is, I think, based on what Kevin told me, I think that middle 40% is there. I think you guys know how to meet them, talk to them better than I do. So if you have a candidate, you've taken them through some steps, I recommend sort of building a timeline for the apprenticeship. A historical apprenticeship is something like 7 years. That's what traditionally in starting to craft. Our apprenticeships range now from 6 months up to a year or longer at some points. It's all about kind of anticipating the trajectory of an apprentice and laying it out. So in starting an initial plan, you're sort of laying out the exercises and the readings over the course of several months, putting in some checkpoints where you can check in and compare with that learning objective list and find out how the person is doing. So it's just sort of a starting point, a plan that you'll adjust, but I'm a planner, so I like plans. Making an offer to an apprentice, I want to tell you what we've done, just because it's kind of interesting in that our apprenticeships pretty much cost the company the same regardless of how long they are. So there's sort of an inverse relationship to the length of the apprenticeship and the salary during the apprenticeship. But all of our craftsmen then, after having passed the apprenticeship, start out at the same salary. And we give that to them ahead of time. So what that does is let an apprentice, a potential apprentice say, okay, well, this salary is not much, and we don't pay our apprentices a lot. But I can do this for 6 months if I know that this salary is coming at the end. Even if someone ends up not completing the program, they'll still have a decent set of skills that might get them a job someplace else as well. But we sort of set out those expectations from the beginning, and it lets people plan. It lets us take some people that we maybe might not have been able to have otherwise. to zip through here a few mentoring practices. So you have an apprentice, they're in the building, what do you do with them? So I'm going to take you through some of the things that I found that have really made a difference. This is by far from complete, but the first thing is to communicate belonging. Though they're an apprentice, they're still a full-fledged member of the team. So I'll keep on my apprentice their first day, all the company swag, the t-shirt, the water bottle, including them in company events, the happy hours, whatever sort of things your company does, immediately include that apprentice. And they're not some sort of second-class employee. Our apprentices also get our full package benefits when they join the company as well. Require humility. So we actually put apprentices in charge of our office space. So it's up to our apprentices to stock the fridge, to take out the trash, to answer the phone when somebody calls and they have to be buzzed up. We do this, okay, it saves us a little bit on admin staff, but we do this primarily to begin to instill a value of service into the apprentice. Like we're in a software service business. What we do is serve people all day. So this begins at the simplest levels in the office. And what happens is that that attitude of helping and just contributing to the environment continues beyond their apprenticeship. We have this generation in America that they're calling the millennials. It's a very entitled generation that was sort of spoon-fed by their parents and think everything should appear before them on a silver platter. And this is also part of our strategy as that generation comes in to start to teach this service attitude and this. And it's part of the responsibility of learning, and they have to pull to learn. Like we're not teaching, we're guiding them as they learn. The responsibility remains on the apprentice. Being proactive, checking in often with the apprentice. So you put an apprentice into this environment, they've got an exercise, an assignment they need to do. But what makes the magic, what makes them progress so fastly is that the answers they need are close at hand. And that doesn't work if the apprentice is sort of sitting there suffering silently for a long period of time, right? Like you want a little bit of struggle, right? The apprentice needs to try, they need to try to find the information, try to learn what they're doing, but that answer needs to be quick at hand so that they can continue to make progress. And this varies wildly by personalities, by gender, by culture, as to, so I'll sometimes have apprentices who are just like in my ear all the time, and I'll just say, no, go back and look it up, right? But then there are other apprentices who won't ask a question all day, and that'll be a signal to me, okay, it might be stuck, like something's probably wrong here, so I'll go and proactively check in with that person. How's it going? Show me what you're working on. And almost immediately it's like, oh, this thing, it's killing me, right? And that's part of the instruction process. Like, next time ask me sooner, right? It's okay, you can interrupt me, I'm here to be your mentor. Feedback. This is the cornerstone of practice. What makes an apprentice progress so rapidly, so they're constantly getting tons of feedback. So you build this into your schedule, sort of checkpoint reviews where you're checking back in. You're getting feedback daily on the work, on the code. It's really to prevent stagnation. Right? For lack of feedback, the apprentice will just be stuck. Stay stuck. So tons and tons and tons of feedback. Again, as a mentor, you're a guide, not a teacher. There are times when you'll teach things, sure, but primarily you're a guide. The weight of that assignment, the weight of learning lies on the apprentice. They have to pull that information they need. Because you're preparing them for a career in software development. Not just like making it through this program and getting through this one-time thing. You're preparing them for a lifelong career of having to figure stuff out. And that begins inside the apprenticeship. Inspiring. I love software development. It's what I was built to do. I love it because I get to create something out of nothing. I mean, where else can you do that? Like God did that, but where else do you get to do that, to create something out of nothing? Part of the apprenticeship is to share that passion, to inspire your apprentice, into a lifelong career in software. What does this look like? I'll bring an apprentice, and even before, towards the end of their apprenticeship, they actually join client teams and are working, but even before that, I'll bring them in, show them how cool something is that we're building, or show them what a difference this app has made, or how it's enabled to, like, bring them into the success and the excitement of what's going on. Show them what a career in software is going to be like. And then a transition. So at some point, because you're in this sort of learning-only environment, it's a point to transition somebody into full-time. In our case, we call them full-time craftsmen at that point. I told you a little bit about our review process. So we have that. We also have a sort of ceremony that we take apprentices through at the end of their graduation. It's maybe a little bit corny, but it's I was in Scouts and grew up with all these ceremonies, and so it's based on our values, based on our values and principles. It's sort of welcoming craftsmen into this community of development. It's sort of an official marking point as they cross this milestone. Leave you with just a couple of thoughts. One of my first apprentices, this guy from Taiwan, who loved Confucius. He showed me this thing that Confucius said: teach your student according to their aptitude. Provide education for all without discrimination. So what an apprenticeship is about: teaching according to aptitude. It's not a one-size-fits-all program. It's individual instruction targeted at an individual's needs. And I have this crazy notion. The notion is that anyone who wants to can learn to code. I really believe that's sort of in the deepest core of my being, that anybody who wants it can learn this. Their trajectories might look different. It might take somebody a different amount of time, but anyone can do this. What I haven't told you about a lot today are the failures along the way, the apprentices that didn't make it, the places where my attention waned at the cost of an apprentice. And so I want to put that disclaimer in there that we got here through a lot of failure, a lot of experimentation. And in some ways I look at those and I feel like an imposter up here sometimes, just looking at everything we went through. Like, there might be false starts, and that's okay. Why apprenticeship? Why do I want to teach the world to code? So there is this global trend towards these cognitive, non-repetitive jobs like programming, as the sort of non-cognitive, non-repetitive jobs are declining. Like, these are on the increase. There's such a low barrier to entry to programming. It doesn't take much. But a computer and an internet connection to be able to make a living programming. I think it's got the potential to transform economies and lives across the globe. And based on what I've heard today, the stakes might even be higher today. I was really inspired this morning about giving someone a reason to live. And if that's what we're a part of, holy cow. This is a slow model. 6 months, a year is a long time to invest in an individual. But the interesting thing about the model is that it's slow, but it's also exponential. And that once you mentor somebody, and they turn around and start mentoring, and we have these proximal zones of learning all up and down the organization, and all kinds of people are mentoring, and their mentors are mentoring. We broke into the 4th generation of mentors at 8th Light in this last year, which I think makes me a great grand mentor. But it's a long-term play, but it can be a pretty substantial. So here's some resources for you. I do highly recommend this book, Apprenticeship Patterns. It goes through a bunch of learning patterns. I have most every apprentice start by reading that. I'll get a list and snap it. I'll tweet out I'll tweet out this link as well. This is a PDF that has some of the handouts I mentioned today. There's a ton of great articles on the 8th blog about apprenticeship. We've been writing about it for a good 9 years, and just tons of great information. And of course, you're welcome to reach out to me on Twitter or to email me directly. I'll be around for the rest of the conference as well, so I'm happy to talk to you, specifically about your context, specifically maybe about your attempts or your thoughts on this matter. Thank you again. I am again just so honored to have gotten to spend this time with you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Doug. It was brilliant. I'm sure there's loads of questions. Josh.
Thank you very much for a great talk. I just wanted to ask, you spoke a lot about a lot of technical things in the apprenticeship. Do you do much on the kind of softer side of things? So, for example, maybe Agile or the workflow stuff, operations management, interpersonal skills, that kind of stuff, as opposed to more technical?
Yes, absolutely. I have this persona, my apprentices have called it Other Doug. He's like the customer who walks into the iteration meeting and slams his fist on the table like, this doesn't work right. But I put on that hat, we do that to sort of teach those soft skills of customer interaction and development. We'll touch on things like DevOps by making them deploy their application. And no, you can't use Heroku because it's too easy. So yeah, we do focus on a lot more than just the development skills.
Excuse me?
So in keeping with your metaphor about software being magic, does apprenticeship have to begin at the junior level, or can you get an intermediate guy finding an archmage, for instance, and that archmage takes them on?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have two questions. Can I just throw them both in and then
I'll try to keep you thinking about it.
Yeah, that's right. Archmage. And then the other one is, do apprentices ever turn evil?
The first one's easy to answer, yes. We do bring people in at all skill levels. That's why each according to their aptitude. It still is the only way we bring somebody in. So even if we bring in an experienced guy, we take them through an apprenticeship. It might be shorter, but at least to sort of verify and instill the practices that we do at 8th. Do apprentices turn evil? They do start to talk back to you. Well, the problem is when they start to learn more than you know. That's when it's time to put them off the bowl a little.
Question in front?
I think I was going to ask, you get this pretty much every time you do this, is there a lower barrier mechanism to entry wanting to introduce an apprenticeship program?
It's super low. All you got to do is say, can I hire a junior guy? Right? Like, it can start with one person and one apprentice. It doesn't have to be a massive program. It can just be, you'll have to figure out how to get this person hired inside your company. But if you can do that and take responsibility for that person, you can start an apprenticeship person with just a single person. It certainly, once an apprenticeship program has momentum, it becomes easier and starts to take care of itself a little bit more. But yeah, you can start small. We certainly did. We started with a single apprentice.
Right, you mentioned basically masters and apprentices, but in this apprenticeship metaphor, you also have journeymen. Do you take this whole idea a bit further?
It's interesting. We've struggled. We still call everyone in the company a software craftsman or an apprentice. We're sensing the need to have a few more designations. I'm not sure where that journey will end up for us. It's been, because as we've grown, it's sometimes hard for a person to find their place. Where do I fit in this bigger organization? It was easy when we're small. It was like, this client needed this thing we needed over here, and people jump on responsibility. But it becomes harder. And so, journeyman actually has a very specific meaning, especially historically, and it's actually about leaving the master you learned with and going and learning from other people. And we implement this practice as we've grown. We've been able to do it inside the company, and that After you graduate, you can actually choose another mentor, work with that mentor. You can choose another one of our office locations and go and work there. We do a thing we call craftsman swaps, where I actually swap a person with another company for a week. You can go learn sort of inside of another company that sort of does a similar thing and is willing to sign a thing to enable that to happen. Question at the back.
Have you ever come across someone that shouldn't be mentored in this field?
And somebody who shouldn't be what?
Mentored in this field, their passion is possibly better applied in a different field.
So we have people who will not finish. And maybe it's for that reason, maybe it's for other reasons. But we have a second kind of apprenticeship program, we call it our student apprenticeship, where somebody can come in to just sort of experiment with the profession. They're not paid, but we allow them into the office. Because of the labor laws in the States, we cannot receive any benefit from them whatsoever. So it's actually like, by law, we can't put them to work. But they're sort of in the environment, able to learn and work. And that's how we sort of help people discern, is this the vocation for you? But usually once somebody starts our apprenticeship program, we call it our resident apprentice program, they pretty well have discovered that for themselves, that this is a vocation that they.
This question over there.
Thanks, that was really interesting and sounds like a great way to learn. I find myself, however, very often caught up in conversations at a national level about how to develop software developers. And really at an unimaginable scale in terms of what the needs are. And so I wondered if you had any thoughts on scaling this up, or is this of necessity something that happens within an organization and therefore is of necessity limited in scale?
It is slow and it is individual. In terms of scaling it up, like what could a government or an organization do to promote this kind of learning? I think they could sponsor apprenticeships. There probably needs to be some sort of criteria around like that apprenticeship is specifically focused on learning. But I think that bigger organizations could reduce the risk for a company to start an apprenticeship program by sponsoring them. So like that's the best thing I've seen. But this conversation is being elevated. Our president has been talking about apprenticeship in a really interesting way. This guy, Dave Hoover, who talks a lot about apprenticeship, he's been to the White House to talk about apprenticeship happening. So, there are countries where this is actually already sort of baked in. Germany is one, for example, where apprenticeship is already an ingrained part of the cultural process. So, I think it's possible, but it begins, I guess, individually.
Question?
Have you ever experienced problems around craftsmen not willing or challenged to take on apprentices, or not eagerly or keen towards sharing information and sharing skills?
So because virtually everyone in our company was apprenticed, there's very few people who don't want to turn around and do the same for somebody else. And I recognize that we're unique in that position. You might be, but I think it's important that it's an opt-in process. It's something people have to choose to be a part of. I don't think you can force this on somebody. And I'm interested in inspiring people to do this, but not twisting their arm, not forcing them to, because I don't think it'll work.
Another question here. Josh?
So one thing that surprised me in your talk is you obviously very highly value apprenticeship and the whole mentoring program. What surprised me is that you mentioned that most of it takes place after hours, during lunches. I would have thought that for a company that values it so highly, you would have tried to make time during the workday and kind of part of people's roles to make time for this. Just explain maybe the thinking behind that.
We gotta keep the lights on. I mean, that's, so like, we already give 10% time to craftsmen and apprentices. We take Friday afternoons off. We have a speaker in, people work on open source projects. So a full week for our craftsmen is 36 hours. So into that framework, we're not afraid of asking for this little bit of extra.
Thanks, Dad, for a great talk. Do you have any testers at Applied, and is apprenticeship for testers an option?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think testing is a craft in the same way that development is. I think absolutely the same. I think your checklist of skills will look very different, right? But I think that you can still build a set of learning outcomes and build exercises to do that. And if we don't have testers inside of APAC, we certainly work with them inside of our client projects and have plenty of interactions. Like I love working with testers and sort of giving them the tools to start scripting tests and to get out of click all day. It's usually not good for the company.
Not those kind of testers.
Yeah, I think it applies in several other related areas in our discipline as well. So it can be applied anywhere you have that hand-eye feedback.
Okay, let's have another one or two questions. You have a question here?
I don't actually have a question, but I have a reply to your question. I work for a software development, a software testing company, and we actually run a program similar to yourself. We actually call it bootcamp program. And we actually do ours, if you call 10, we have 10 or 15 people come into the organisation at any one time. So if you call that scaling, then we actually do that scaling program. And we also take career change people. So we might take developers that want to career change to testers. So a program like this within a testing organisation can be done.
Thanks. I think let's just take one more question. Here we go in front.
Thanks. I just want to ask, when you're talking about developers and testers and whatever, I have to ask a question, what about analysts? Does this work for analysts too? Because I find that a lot of the analyst learnings are soft skills and the way to deal with people and the way to deal with developers, which are weird on their own. We all love them, but yeah, they are. So I just want to know, does this include analysts in the mentoring programs?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it certainly could. The key would be, can you build a program that has exercises specifically for the learning of the end? So that is that, side sort of toy projects. What things could you set up for somebody that they would need to learn the skills necessary to do the job? If you can find those, I think you can build a program. Thank you.
Can we leave it there? Any more urgent quick questions? One more? Okay, there we go.
Right.
Last one.
So you spoke a little bit about the transition period. How long is that? Because I've seen that people really learn well when they're doing actual work. And you seem to put a lot of emphasis on preparing for actual work.
So we'll do, again, it depends on the length of the apprenticeship, but usually at least a month at the end is inside of a team working unbillable for a client, working with a client team to get charged there. Prior to that, we may put them on an apprentice-only team for a while to learn some of the teamwork skills, working on something that we're okay if it fails, like some internal tool or some one of my pet projects or something. So we'll gradually work them into full-fledged team. But that beginning individual learning, those are real projects, real challenges, real work that they're doing. There's just no, it's a safe place, no consequence to the failure that's inevitable with learning.
Super.
Okay. I'd be happy to stick around if you have more questions. I'll stay here.
Okay, we'll mosey on to the bubble in a few minutes. So, Doug, thank you very much. I think a big round of applause.